Today is the first of my Same But Different Christmas card series for 2022, and I've got some awesome Catherine Pooler products to use, and the technique we're going to be using today is heat embossing. So I'm going to share with you 6 different ways that you can use heat embossing on your Christmas card projects, and if you stick around to the end, I've also got a bonus technique to share with you. So the set that I'm going to be focusing on today is the Jolly Holly stamp set, and this is very unique. It's a layering holly leaf and there's lots of fun layers that you can use. Has some coordinating dies, and I've also got the Holiday One-Liner Sentiments stamp set as well as the Holly Jolly layered word set. So we're going to be using these layers in the stamp set to our advantage today, starting with our first technique, which is Emboss Resist. Emboss Resist simply means to emboss an image and then ink over top of it, and the embossed portion of the image is going to resist the ink. Let me show you what I mean. So what I've done here is taken one of the layers of the holly leaves and I've stamped it with some Versamark. I'm heat embossing it with some white ink. You could use clear embossing powder on white cardstock. It will give you the same effect. And what I'm doing now is just adding ink over top. You can swipe ink pads over top. I'm using a blending tool. There are lots of different kinds of these on the market, but you could use whatever you have. I do like to come in and wipe away the excess ink that's built up on the embossed areas, and because this set has a coordinating die, I did go ahead and use those to cut out my leaf images. And I took it one little step further as well. I've grabbed a darker green and I'm using my blending tool again just to add some depth to the images by blending a bit around the edges. Now I will link all the products that I've used in the description below, and there'll be lots more information at my blog post. So I'm going to white heat emboss a sentiment on some black cardstock. I am prepping all my cardstock today with the powder tools. There's 2 different versions that I use. I have a powder bag as well as that tool you just saw. And even though you could see it before, after I wipe it away with that cloth, you can't see the powder anymore. But it does stop all those stray white powders ruining your work. There are ways to fix it, like I just showed you then. I do come in with a craft knife if there's an area that embossed that I didn't quite like, and that works well in very small areas only. So I kept all of my cards very clean and simple today. I do like to add dimension on my cards, but you could certainly add less dimension and use the same designs if you're worried about postage. So we're on to our second technique now, which is to emboss a die cut. So I've already die cut my words from some black cardstock, and what I'm doing here is actually adding my Versamark ink directly to the die cuts. This is going to allow the embossing powder to adhere directly to the die cut words, and I'm going to be able to build up some layers on here and add some great dimension to these really fine die cuts. I am using some very fine embossing powder, but you could certainly use a regular one, would probably work even better. I just don't own any black regular embossing powder. There are different, and I'm saying this with inverted commas, thicknesses to embossing powders. I did about 3 or 4 layers on each of these die cuts in total. It is a little bit messy to do, but it's really worth the effort to get that dimension and that shine on this die cut word. I have a little silicone mat here that's kind of protecting my work surface and my fingers, and when I add the Versamark ink between each layer of embossing powder, I am waiting for the die cut to cool down in between. It's just such a fabulous font. Now I needed something for this great word to sit on, so I just quickly created a multi-layered stamped background. I've used a couple of different colors of greens, and then I've added some berries using some of the pinks. You can make this as clean and simple or as full on as you like. You could even create layers of die cut holly leaves and do it that way. I just actually stamped directly on a piece of cardstock, which I added to the front of my A2 card. Now I've got some sticky specks here, which is like the sticky dots. This is a really fine adhesive that I can hold these die cut words onto. It picks up the stickiness from the sheet, and that's going to adhere without too much sort of glue, problems with glue sleeping out the sides of these intricate letters and words. So use whatever you have. A matte medium would work just as well. I sort of am going back and forth between the two at the moment. I particularly like these sticky dots if I'm using a vellum, because you can't see them. It's like magic. Now, rather than try and layer up the tittle for the J, I actually just came in with a black enamel dot. Can you see the shine and the dimension? I just love it. It looks fabulous, even better in real life, I've got to say. All right, so we're on to technique number 3 now, and we're going to add a bit of sparkle. Now, this isn't something I've ever done before, so I had a lot of fun trying this technique and seeing how it worked out. I wanted to create my own cardstock, coloured cardstock here, so I started with a piece of white cardstock and just literally swiped the ink pads over the cardstock to create the different kind of colours here. I'm working on the pink one here. I've added some clear embossing powder, and I wasn't quick enough. I wasn't sure which way to go about it. That's why I only did a small section. I came in and added the really fine Prisma glitter on top, but I was just too slow. It wasn't hot enough to take the glitter. I mean, I could reheat it with the heat tool, and that is going to work, but I don't like reheating embossing powder. You can kind of lose a bit of its shine that way. So what I did instead was add the glitter to the dry embossing, like the clear powder on top, and then hit it with the heat tool from behind so that the glitter didn't fly everywhere as I was heating it up. And this worked a treat. I know the cardstock's warping. This is what I do. I just sandwich it in some scrap paper after it's cooled down, of course, and then add a layer and a shim and throw it through my Gemini Junior. You can do it with whichever die cutting machine you have, and that will just help to flatten out your cardstock. All my self-coloured cardstock now I just cut into varying widths of strips, because I want to create my own striped background. Only one of these has the glitter in it, and that's one of the pink versions. And by adding the heat embossed, the clear embossing powder with the glitter, it really did change the colour up quite a bit. So even though it's the same colour pink as the other pink cardstock, it actually looks a bit darker. And one thing of note too, when you create your own cardstock like this, just be aware that as the ink dries, it will dry lighter than when it initially hits, and smoother too. It actually smooths out because it's a dye ink. It will seep into the cardstock and the colour will smooth out. All right, so I covered the whole piece of cardstock here. It's cut 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 with some adhesive, and then I just laid all my bits of strips of paper on an angle, and to cut the edges off I simply just flip it over and cut them away with some scissors. Then I can use these leftover pieces here to fill in the gaps at the ends. It just saves me having to make up more cardstock. Now I've got the same Holly Jolly layered word again. This time I've multi-layered about 3 layers of die cut white cardstock to add a little bit of dimension to the word itself. I have a piece of vellum that I've die cut with the base layer, and I'm using my chisel glue pen to attach the word directly to the vellum. And then I've got these sticky dots again that I'm using to pick up the vellum and adhere it to the front of my card. You really can't see the adhesive through this vellum because the whole thing is covered. It's wonderful. I thought it'd be fun also to add a couple of little holly leaves and some sequins. Oh, this sequin mix here is called Vienna. It's really pretty. So we're on to our next technique, which is to emboss a stamped image. You can do this with any images that you have, and the MISTI tool is your friend here, because basically you stamp the image. Do make sure that you clean your stamp between adding the ink and adding the Versamark ink, because you don't want to contaminate your Versamark ink. So wipe away the coloured ink and then add the Versamark ink, and then you can add your embossing powder. I usually like to use a clear embossing powder so that you can see the colours through. You can use, there are embossing powders that are translucent, that will give you a great effect as well, and some awesome dimension and shine to an image that would otherwise just be stamped, and it's exactly the same shape and size as the image that you stamped. And then you just heat emboss it as you regularly would. Okay, so let's take that same technique just a little bit further. This time we're going to do some double heat embossing. So exactly the same again, literally stamp out your image, clean your stamp it again with Versamark ink, add your embossing powder, which this time I'm using the clear embossing powder, and heat set that. So this set is perfect because it's a layering set. Once my image had cooled down, then I lined up the layering stamp and I added some Versamark ink, and using the MISTI, because it's going to help stop that sort of slipperiness, I just inked the layered image on top of the heat embossed image. So this time I made sure to get an opaque embossing powder, so one that is going to not be see-through, and I have grabbed like a metallic green embossing powder here. You can use whatever you have on hand, and it pays to maybe have a little practice on some scrap cardstock to see if you're going to be able to see the patterns clearly enough. But how fun is that? I just hit it with my heat tool again, and it just gives your embossed images a whole new look. So I added one of the sentiments, embossed that in some white. See, I told you, lots of embossing today. And then I drew my own branch with a black marker, added some white gel pen to the center of that, and then adhered my leaves, some berries, and did a little bit of doodling, which is not something it's not a go-to for me. A little bit of stress there, but we got through. I figured, what could possibly go wrong? If I don't like it, I can start again. And added my dimension, as I always do. Okay, so we're on to technique number 6 now, and we're going to be adding some highlights. I started by stamping out the mistletoe image and adding some sweet little berries. I'm prepping my cardstock again like I have done throughout the whole video, even though you might not have seen it. And I've got a Versamarker. So this is the same as the Versamark ink, but it's a dual-ended pen. One end is a bullet tip and the other is a brush nib. So it's going to give you lots of different options. And basically I just took the bullet tip end and added some highlights to the stamped image. So what I mean by highlights is I just chose, followed the lines. Anyone can do this. I just followed the lines of the leaves. I also did it on the pink bow that I'd stamped, and then I came in with some clear embossing powder. This would look fabulous if you've got like a clear sparkly embossing powder. There's so many different ones on the market now. You could really go to town with this, or you could use a green one as well. That would look good. And then I heat set it. I've added one of the sentiments from the Holiday one-liner set, and then just lined it up with my line tool, as well as adding a bit of foam to the back just to add that dimension. Here we go again. I love dimension on my Christmas cards. And then I could just pop up my bow on the front as well. That's a really simple technique and such a fun way to use the Versa marker pen. You could do this on so many different images that you already have in your stash. Okay, so time for our bonus technique. We're going to be heat embossing using double-sided tape. Yes, you can. Did you know that you could do that? This is a new one for me. So I thought it'd be fun to create a rectangle border. I'm going to make a shaker card here today. I just had to throw one of those in because why not? Who doesn't love a shaker card? I eyeballed it. Probably should have, drawn it out. I'm not sure. But I was just having fun here, giving this technique a try, and I have the die cut sitting there because that's going to be my shaker center, and I just needed a bit of a guide on how big I wanted the rectangle to be, and basically this is just some Be Creative or a score tape, one of those nice strong tapes. It's a thin one. It's the 1/8 of an inch, and literally all you need to do is add the embossing powder directly over the tape and then hit it with your heat tool as you normally would. It works, and it doesn't lift off, and it's such a fun idea. And I use the same green embossing powder that I used on the double heat embossing technique I showed you before. But have a look at this. How cool is that? It's got like a metallic finish on it, this embossing powder. It's really pretty. I know, right? You're thinking, what else can I do? And everyone has some double-sided tape in their stash, for sure. What I did here, I thought it'd be fun this time to do a repeat stamped background with sentiment rather than actually add a sentiment to the card. But you could put pictures in the background and put your sentiment on the front. You can do anything. I'm using the Vienna sequins yet again because they're so pretty. And I've added some dimensional foam on the front where I die cut the holly leaf out. I have added my acetate there. It's hard to see, but it's definitely there. And I had that bow that I created earlier that was heat embossed, and I hadn't used it on the previous card, and I decided to add that to the front here as well. I do hope you enjoyed today's techniques and are going to give them a try. If you liked today's video, please click on the thumbs up button, and if you hang around to the very end, you'll also see the last 2 years of my same but different Christmas card series, and I hope you find some more inspiration there. I'll see you in those videos.